nearly 33 years now. I've worked in midwifery, general practice, and I've been working in the oncology space since about 2009. I was working as a breast care nurse for 10 years through Cancer Council, and I've spent the last 3 years working at Alan Walker in clinical trials coordination. And so today I think what I hope that you'll get out of this is just perhaps a little bit of knowledge around clinical trials and how they might work, and to open your mind to a possibility, if it's mentioned to you at some stage, that you don't overreact and think, oh my god, experimental drugs, what's coming, that you just have a little bit more knowledge around what clinical trials mean and how it might actually benefit you. So it's down at Nightcliff Beach a couple of years ago, but I just love that shot at when we had the activity this morning. I chose the sea because the sea always brings me a lot of comfort. So overview, so this is what I hope that you'll get out of this presentation, is just an understanding of what breast cancer trials are, why you might consider it, a little bit of understanding about the safety of clinical trials, the different phases of clinical trials, things that you might think about if that becomes an option for you, questions you might ask your doctor, what does a practical participation look like in a clinical trial, and then just briefly touch on teletrials. Now this is a video. I'm not really sure if we're going to be able to make it work, but let's see. So this is Fran Boyle. She's Professor Fran Boyle. She's very big in the breast cancer space, and this is just her discussing what breast cancer trials are. No, and it's not going to work. Do I have to do anything to make that work, Isabel?
I just know. Don't worry. Basically what Fran was saying is that breast cancer trials are research in action. So it's research happening whilst patients are getting treatment opportunities, and that research ultimately contributes to new treatment developments. As Narayan was saying, he referred to a couple of trials there, and the ever-evolving new treatments that are coming out. Even in the 10 years that I've been around in this space, the treatment options have just expanded exponentially, and that's basically due to clinical trials, and clinical trials can't happen without participants, and that's where you guys potentially may come in. Thank you.
I can send around the video afterwards with the links.
So this is a slide I actually borrowed from Dr. Charakitis. He did a presentation last year, and you don't have to understand the technicalities and all the words and things, but it just shows. So
from 2010 to 2021-22, the development of all these different drugs that are looking at the different biological markers in breast cancer. So mTOR inhibitors and the HER2 blockers and the PARP inhibitors, all those things. So it's just ever evolving, and it will keep evolving. So why consider a clinical trial? So the first reason is you might get access to a new treatment that's not currently available through the PBS. So the PBS being the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, the funding for drugs where you don't have to pay for anything. So sometimes there's access programs, but often in a clinical trial, it's a drug that by the time you're being offered it, it's been through a lot of rigorous testing and it's been proven safe, but they're still trying to refine, perhaps dosing and things like that. And it might be a treatment option that becomes available to you. And yes, if you do receive that treatment, you may be one of the patients that derives benefit from it. So that could be a really positive thing for you. By accessing a clinical trial, it might expand the treatment options that are available to you. So often with metastatic disease in particular, there's lots of different treatment options, but obviously as you go further along the treatment trajectory, those possibilities of treatment, they do narrow down. So a clinical trial can open up expand those opportunities. On a clinical trial, you'll get an excellent standard of care. Now, that's not to say that if you're not on a trial, you don't. It just means that because of the way trials are run, there's lots of things that we need to do. There's lots of checks and balances we need to do. You've got a bigger team than normal looking after you because you've also got a clinical trial coordinator. And we need to make sure that everything is going as it should. So there's some extra tests and things, but you certainly benefit. Oops, I've just gone a bit too fast there. By participating in a clinical trial, you'll be helping researchers develop new treatments that could potentially help others in the future. So even if you don't derive benefit from a trial, whatever you may have contributed as in your participation will definitely benefit people in the future, because whatever's happened with you contributes to the overall data for the trial. And I think participating in a clinical trial for people often provides a really positive focus, which, from something that is otherwise impacting their life quite negatively. So that can be a really positive focus for people to have. So the safety of clinical trials, like I said, it's not it's an experimental treatment type of thing. By the time we have a clinical trial activated at the hospital, it's gone through a very rigorous process. So every clinical trial has a protocol, and it's a written document by the investigator, which for us is usually an organisation down south. It might be a collaborative group, or it might be something like Breast Cancer Trials Group, or it might be a pharmaceutical company that's sponsoring a trial. So there's a protocol, and protocols can be a 60-page document, they can be a 400-page document. So they cover every aspect of the trial, everything they know about the drugs that they're using, what they expect to happen, what they hope to gain out of the trial, how we're going to monitor patients, who's going to oversee that, what we're going to be reporting on in terms of safety. All aspects of the trial are in this document, and that document itself has to go through locally here in Darwin. It would go through our governance and ethics people. So the ethics is looking at the whole ethics of the trial, whether it's ethically a good thing for our community, and then the research governance is looking at whether we as a organisation have capacity to run the trial? Do we have enough resources? Do we have enough staffing? Are we going to be able to provide the drugs when they're needed? So it goes through those processes. And then in clinical trials, we have what we call our good clinical practice guidelines. The very strict guidelines about how we conduct our trials, how we communicate with our patients, most importantly, how we consent them to a trial, all aspects of trial operations. Everything we do has to have a process and a procedure, and it needs to be documented very thoroughly. You have to be really quite anal to work in clinical trials, because everything is just dotting I's and crossing T's all day, every day, and recording all of that as you need to. And then with trials, there's monitoring. So a sponsor site from down south would be monitoring our work, monitoring our data entry, monitoring how our patients are going. If we're having recurrent issues, they would want to know why we're having recurrent issues. So there's that ongoing process throughout a trial as well. So there's different phases of clinical trials, and at the moment we mostly conduct phase 2 and phase 3 trials here, but looking to the future, definitely phase 1 trials is something that we'll want to focus on. So phase 1 trials are trials that are conducted in quite small groups for new drug treatments. They're run for very short periods of time, and they're really looking at the safety aspect of the drugs and side effects, and trying to work out potentially what drug dosages people can tolerate. So they're short, sharp trials just to break down doses and safety aspects, and then from that they will perhaps modify their protocol and run another phase 1 to further refine what they think are the safe drug dosages for patients. Phase 2 trials are further testing in a larger group to determine effectiveness and just to continue and evaluate those side effects, and they usually run for a longer period of time, so it could be 2 to 3 years perhaps. And then phase 3 trials are where we're looking at comparing these new drugs with standard of care drugs. So it might be that it's a randomised trial where some patients are randomised to receive standard of care, and other people will be randomised to receive the trial drug. And also including quality of life aspects in phase 3 trials. So quality of life is always very uppermost in the overall impact of a trial drug on a patient. And then phase 4 drugs are where the new drug has been approved for use in clinical practice, but there's continued evaluation on side effects and safety over a much longer period of time, so it could be another 10 or 20 years. So things to consider in a clinical trial, in a treatment clinical trial, because that's pretty much what I'm talking about today. There's a lot of other different trials, but my focus today is on treatment trials. So things to think about is that the new treatment may not be as good as or better than the standard of care treatment. That if you go on a trial, you may receive either a placebo, although in breast cancer trials it's very, very rare that you would alone receive a placebo. At the bare minimum, you would usually receive a standard of care treatment or the trial medication. New treatments can have unexpected or worse side effects than those in the standard treatment, and that's part of that trial process, is monitoring those side effects very, very closely. You may need to have more doctor's visits and be required to undergo extra investigations as part of your participation in the trial, particularly in the early phase. Now, for some people, they don't mind that because it's extra monitoring, but it's really very, very important to get baselines of everything when you start in a trial. So looking at your heart function potentially, or a different range of blood tests or something like that. As you go on in the trial, things tend to normalise, and it looks more like a normal treatment cycle that you've perhaps potentially been through before.
The new treatment, it may benefit some patients, but not all, and that will always be the way, and there's no way to determine who will benefit and who won't. I've got some asterisks there because I'll talk about teletrials, but access to some clinical trials may involve travel interstate with added expenses, obviously, and separation from support network. So at the moment, there is no funding through patient travel to travel interstate for a clinical trial. Some people still choose to do that, but it's a big decision because you're away from your support network. Sometimes it can be for an unknown period of time. So there's a lot to think about there. So questions to ask your doctor. So these are the things if someone, perhaps one of the doctors says to you that, you know, they might look at clinical trial options for you, or they might come to you with a clinical trial proposal that they're thinking for you. These are the things, some of the things that you might like to ask. Maybe. No? Look at me, I'm trying to be fancy. It's just all right, I'll just tell you about that, that's fine. My trusty paper copy here.
Low-tech is good tech.
Yeah, low-tech is good tech, yeah. So you could actually broach the subject with your doctor. You could say to him, when is the right time to think about a clinical trial? They might go, oh, we're not there yet, you know, we've still got plenty of treatment options. Or he might say, look, you know, that's not a bad idea, I can start looking for you. I know with Dr. Coranth, he's usually like 3 treatments ahead of someone, like he's already thinking about what they might need in the future before they even need it. So your doctor, you may have some thoughts about that. If they're talking to you about a trial, it might be, you know, you could ask why are you eligible for this trial? It might be that you have a particular profile. It might be that you've had a test that shows you've got a particular mutation that's targetable through a trial eligible drug. Possible benefits and risks of the trial. How long does participation look like? Why do they think the treatment will work for you and how it might work for you? What's known about the drug so far? How it's been tested so far? How it's decided whether you'll get the standard of care treatment or perhaps a trial drug. What does the appointments look like? What will I need to do to participate? Who will be part of your trial team? And then whether you can change your mind about the trial participation. So you might sign up, you might start on a trial for whatever reason, you might decide, I don't want to do this anymore. Is that an option? And I can tell you it is. You can pull out at any time at all. So what does participation look like? So just from a very practical side of things. So usually the oncologist would discuss a trial option with you and provide you with the what we call the patient information and consent form. So it can be an 8-page document, it can be a 20-page document. It tells you everything you need to know about what the trial is trying to achieve, what the drugs are like, what the side effects potentially could be, and what's expected of you in the trial. You take that away, you have a chat with your family, your friends, your GP even, write down some notes, some questions you might have, and then you go back to another appointment, you have another discussion with the doctor. Sorry. Oh, I forget you're recording. You can have a good chat about it and he can answer any questions, and from that you can usually decide whether you want to proceed or not. And then if you do, you'll sign that consent form. Then you will be introduced to a clinical trial coordinator. There's 3 of us at the hospital at the moment. So you'll have one of us working on your side as well. We'll do the screening test. So there's usually, like I said, might be some blood tests, it might be an ECG, it might be a mammogram even. So we'll get those tests done, make sure that you're fully eligible for the trial, and then we'll get you enrolled. And then you'll be given a schedule of appointments, so you'll know what your treatment looks like, how often you'll be coming in, how often you have to do your scans, how often you have to do your blood tests. But eventually it ends up looking like your normal treatment cycles that you've perhaps done in the past. And yeah, that's basically how it is. And you would normally stay on the trial for as long as it is working for you. If you're going along and then suddenly you have some disease progression, then it would show us that the trial's not working for you, the medication's not working for you, and you would come off the trial and then you would talk to your oncologist about the next treatment option. It's not impossible to go from one trial to another trial, so that's always a possibility as well. Teletrials are a new thing in Darwin, so we've had a team for about 12 months now building capacity to run teletrials all across the NT. So it's a federally funded program, and Darwin was given a big chunk of money to make sure that we could build that program up here. And what it basically means, it broadens opportunities for clinical trials for patients by allowing them to access a trial without actually leaving the territory. Hence, we don't have to think about the added expense of leaving the territory or leaving the support networks. And it just provides more equity across everybody in the NT, so not only people in Darwin but in rural and remote locations, to access trials and new therapies and those reduced expenses and stresses. Resources, is some great resources on clinical trials. If it's something you think you might want to think about in the future, I really encourage you to read, have a look at these, because they explain everything really, really clearly and give you a really good level of basic knowledge. So Cancer Council have a great little booklet, Breast Cancer Trials Group have a great little booklet, and both of those are actually out on the table outside if you wanted to grab a copy. And Breast Cancer Trials also have a great fact sheet as well, that's on their website, and those codes you can scan and just download the document to your phone too if you want to. And then finally I had another video. I'm going to say it's not going to work, so we won't worry about that. Do you reckon? We'll give it a crack. No, it's not going to work. Anyway, it was just a lovely patient story. That's Britta. She was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer at 38. She was offered a clinical trial quite early on in her diagnosis, and this is several years down the track, and she was doing really, really well. And you can just tell by the look on her face, she's living her best life as she can with metastatic disease. And then just a final slide there. Not my quote, someone else's quote. But that's all ever anyone wants out of clinical trials, is to help people live a longer life and a quality of life, whilst continuing to conduct research and improve treatments for women living with breast cancer, but in particularly metastatic breast cancer. I'm around for the rest of the day if you've got any questions, happy to have a chat.